Welcome in, everybody. This is the Wrestling Mat on a quiet day in the world of professional wrestling. Right? Nothing big going on. We're all just kind of hanging out today, waiting for any big news to drop, right? That's what we're doing today. I know what's going on, and we will have a lot to talk about, I think, for the rest of the week as it relates to what's going on, I think, in the world, especially of WWE. Maybe not the current world, but the past world, a world that I get to speak on a little bit, of course, over the next few days. Now, you will probably at this point have seen some or maybe all of the Vince McMahon Netflix documentary. I'm going to cover a little bit of that today, but I do realize, and I'll give you a little, there are some spoilers here if you haven't watched it yet. I have seen everything. We're going to address that in full detail tomorrow night, a Thursday night, September 26th at 7 p.m. Eastern, a very special live episode of the Wrestling Mat Show. But you'll have to be a Mat member at the Mat Camper level, at the Mat event level to be part of that. $6.99 a month for the Mat Camper level, $24.99 a month for the Mat event level. And we got a lot there for you. The members-only videos. We're going to be watching Raw next week. We're doing this 30-minute private Zoom at the Mat event level. We're going to have that watch-along scheduled the next couple of days, but a big part of the bonus content, as I say, always is because you guys support and are making those things happen, and I am going to be doing a special full-on episode for the Vince McMahon Netflix doc. I figured do it Thursday, give everybody a chance to kind of catch up on everything, but I'll address a little bit of that today, but a big topic of discussion on today's show is going to be the end of NXT on USA Network. Last night brings that run to a close. Now, it's a little different than past runs in that we're going to get into this today, not only from what happened the last night and where they're going, but the beginning of it, because I was there. I was there from the jump. I had started with WWE just weeks prior to NXT's move from Hulu and WWE Network and all that stuff to USA Network, to now, cable television, something that everybody could easily watch every Tuesday night live, sometimes taped, obviously, or Wednesday night initially. And we'll get into all of that and what the goals were. But, man, it's a big week here. As I said, the Vince documentary. We're going to talk a little bit about that on the show today later on in terms of what Vince has said. But like I said, I'm going to go much greater detail about that tomorrow. I'll also be going into detail with a little bit of a different perspective on Grand Slam, AEW Grand Slam. More on that, though, maybe later tonight if you keep an eye on socials, Wrestling Mat 23 on Instagram and Twitter, and The Mat Camp. Maybe you'll get a little bit more of a hint of that later on tonight. But I'll be bringing a different perspective reacting to Grand Slam tonight on tomorrow's episode. So 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern tomorrow, Thursday, normal episode for you guys live here on the WrestlingMatchShow.com. Also available, of course, where you get your podcast, thanks to those in the Believe Network. Make sure you're subscribed to the WrestlingMatchShow.com on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, no matter how you take this in, whether you watch it live, and we appreciate those that are with us here today, whether you were watching after the fact. Leave your comments down below on what we're getting into and anything else you want to hear from. If you're listening via the podcast, thank you. But no matter how you take it in, make sure you're subscribed to all our feeds. It really supports the show. Rate, review, and subscribe where you get your podcast. Make sure you are subscribed for free, all of this, by the way, at thewrestlingmatchshow.com. And if you want to support just a little bit more, please head over to thewrestlingmatchshow.com if you're listening after the fact, if we're not live right now, and go take a look at becoming a member. We'd love to have you there. As we get into so much of what's going on in the world of professional wrestling. Bad Blood is obviously, next week, and we discussed a lot of that and where things are going in WWE right now. And, yesterday's episode discussed a lot of, well, wow, what a problem to have with the star power on Raw and SmackDown right now, that there is a fair argument to be made of either Drew McIntyre and CM Punk main eventing Bad Blood inside Hell in a Cell with promises of blood from both men, or you main event with an unreal, unexpected, at least a few months ago, pairing of Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns taking on Solo Sikoa and Jacob Fatu. What a problem to have. But how do you get to that point? You develop stars. You cultivate talent to get the absolute most out of them. And if you look at the 4 names that I just mentioned, they all came from 4 very, very different places. Roman Reigns, as we were reminded of last Friday, while he has wrestling in his blood and 4 decades plus of wrestling being in his family, he also went on to play football. He went to play football at Georgia Tech. He played in the Canadian Football League and then found his way into wrestling. So that's kind of a two-pronger right there. That is someone who had been around it, who went on to play football and then came into wrestling. And we see where Roman Reigns is at right now. The man he is tagging with at Bad Blood is Cody Rhodes. Very similar upbringing, wrestling around him at all times. Cody went out and maybe tried to do other things, posted, I think, the other day from his 20th high school reunion about here's the old drama club. Cody wanted to get into acting, perhaps. It's in Dustin Rhodes' book, Goldust's book, about that. Did amateur wrestling, but found his way back to wrestling, working for his dad, becoming, obviously, part of Ohio Valley Wrestling and becoming part of FCW, eventually into WWE, which is not where he remained, as we know. And he would go on and find himself on the Indies and Ring of Honor and New Japan and obviously AEW before coming back and becoming the star that he is. There is a path that went in many different directions. That is, I don't want to say atypical for someone who was born into it in a way. But Cody did take a few different paths that others have taken. It wasn't one easy path. And a lot of people have always asked me, how do you get there? What do you do? What do I have to do? And there's no one easy answer to that. I just gave you 2 examples of people who, in a way, from a wrestling perspective, you could say were born into the business. Maybe we're born on second or third base. But they've had their struggles. Professionally, Cody more than Roman, but personally as well. Obviously, Roman has went through very real struggles with his battles with leukemia. And 2 guys who had a more direct path to the business than most had their ups and downs, had things go right for them, had things go wrong for them, had booking decisions hinder them or help them, or booking decisions that they needed to take into their own hands, take their career into their own hands. And now they're the 2 biggest stars in the company. And then you look at the guys that they're going to be facing off against. Jacob Fatu, once again, it's there. But he had his own legal issues, crime, problems with the law, and then making a name for himself on the indies. And does he jump off the page? Is he the most current impressive member of the Bloodline? Yes, he is. There is an intrigue with Jacob Fatu. There is a viciousness that permeates through the screen. And he knows exactly how good he is. And he is such a amazing amalgamation of different members of that family and what he brings to the table. And I think sometimes timing goes a long way. And timing has been right for Jacob Fatu with, hey, we're going to redo this Bloodline. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, wait a minute. Hold on. Everybody that used to be part of it is gone except for Solo. And now he's going to bring in the Girls of Destiny. He's going to bring in Jacob Fatu. And now we have that. And his path was also different than Cody's, different than Roman's. And timing has been a big part of that. And then you come to Solo Sikoa. Obviously, another one, born into the business. From his father, Rikishi, to his brothers, the Usos. Here's someone who is going to be able to do it, is going to have the opportunities to do it. He trained accordingly. Didn't do a ton on the indies. There's a picture of him looking at an AEW logo that Cody once commented on. It doesn't exist anymore on Twitter because it's both been wiped away. But people had their eyes open for Solo Sikoa. And Solo Sikoa is really the only one of the group to truly make his way through what I would call the current WWE system. Yes, Roman did do stuff on NXT, but not for long and not in a way that people would go, oh, Roman's an NXT guy, because I don't think he is. But Solo Sikoa is, and did so at an interesting time for WWE and NXT as a whole. And he was an NXT talent. And once again, circumstances, and I'm not going to put all of it on circumstances, say he was totally lucky, but hey, what's another way to help Roman keep his championship when he's going into enemy territory at Clash of the Castle against Drew McIntyre? A day that seemed like it could be destiny for Drew McIntyre. Oh, there's Solo Sikoa to become the newest member of the Bloodline, to cost Drew the title and now become part of that. And now we see where Solo is. And I wanted to bring up Solo because I wanted to talk about 5 years of NXT on USA Network. That came to an end last night, and not in any kind of spectacular way. I didn't expect it to be a majorly loaded up episode or anything like that. That's what's going to be the next 2 weeks on CW. And CW is obviously putting a lot of effort into promoting it as such, as they try to really branch out with sports, as they're doing with multiple contracts with Live Golf, with football, American football, and NXT is a big part of that. And how did we get to this point? How did WWE get to the point where NXT is now on another television contract, a bigger television contract? How did we get to this point? Has WWE accomplished what they've wanted with NXT? And I think to answer that question, you have to understand that what they've wanted to accomplish has evolved, as wrestling tends to do, as wrestling needs to do. If you go back to the beginning of NXT, it was a competition. It was our introduction to Daniel Bryan. It was our introduction to what became the Nexus. That competition, reality series, game show that went from the USA Network to, or Sci-Fi or whatever, all that stuff, to WWE.com. Coming off of the old ECW, which wasn't really ECW, but you know what I mean. And then became an actual third brand, but a developmental brand, the next step after FCW, which had, for those that don't know, it did have television. It was on the Sunshine Network. It wasn't widely available, but their developmental did have some television. Nowhere near what it would turn into with NXT, and certainly nowhere near where it is right now with NXT. And I remember NXT starting to build some buzz when, they were fully in Full Sail, and I remember hearing about the Wyatt family and hearing about some of the things that were going on there, and Big E, okay, Bo Dallas, okay, who's this Neville guy? I've heard of him from the Indies, and some of the indie names you'd start to hear some buzz around, and it was on Hulu, and I remember, catching up on the show weeks at a time, and then there was this, the women's evolution kind of got going there with Sasha and Charlotte and Paige and, obviously Natalya going kind of down there at times, and Emma, that's what I was thinking of. Emma and Paige had kind of like the first great NXT match. And then where that went from there with, somebody like a Tyson Kidd, TJ Wilson, going back down there, and you see someone like Tyler Breeze start to figure out what he is after toiling at times in FCW. Tyler Breeze was a tag team champion with Roman Reigns. That was a thing. And it started to create more buzz. And it was kind of like, hey, wait a minute. This isn't like Raw and SmackDown. This isn't big. It was shot at Full Sail. There were stands. You could see it. It was a very mini arena. And the idea was, here's a way to get people ready. Here's a way to develop people, and let's do so not an accelerated level, but at the next level up from what we're already doing in FCW, what we're already doing, training people behind the scenes. Let's make this a full-on show and make it a mini Raw set, if you will. Make it a mini SmackDown set, if you will. Let's get them ready for the next step with an almost a graduation of sorts. And it's not a wide audience, and it's going to be on Hulu and all that. And then obviously it moves to the WWE Network and all those things. And here's a way to develop our stars further, not in the biggest way, not throwing them out on Raw and SmackDown, but a step below that was above what they were doing. And then obviously, the big signings, and they sign, who becomes Sami Zayn and Finn Balor and Fergal Devitt and Kenta, Hideo Itami. God, that seems like ancient history now. And Kevin Owens and Samoa Joe. And then it turned into this, well, wait a minute. Is WWE running like an indie brand now? Hunter's vision seems very different than what we see on SmackDown. This is pretty awesome. I like this. And I don't think it was anything groundbreaking. I think it was playing to what was cool. I think it was a little bit more of a wrestling-oriented product, but I don't think it challenged your IQ as much. I don't think it challenged, and I mean that in a way like, I think at times Vince treated the audience as dumber. I think he treated the audience as they're not going to remember that, when he would change his ways so many times, whereas NXT kind of stuck to it. And a lot of that, and I'm going to get into this here as they move into the USA Network, was because they would shoot, a month of TV at a time. So they very much had to write creative, stick to creative, and that was their TV. And it worked. They were doing some good things there. And you were taking the ability to cultivate talent and then go, hey, let's go try this out. And maybe not get immediate feedback, but get enough feedback. And figure out what was working and what wasn't working. And obviously that continued to build and build. And it went from strictly developmental to, we have something here. Hey, this might be able to make us money while getting people ready to go to Raw, to go to SmackDown, to become main eventers, to become the next stars of the future of this company. And then you would end up with, Adam Cole and Undisputed Era, and the females become such a bigger part of that branding and that show. I was at that first takeover. I watched Bayley and Sasha. I know what that meant. I watched Enzo and Cass open up that first, that takeover in Brooklyn, and being the quintessential, perfect opening act to get a crowd fired up. I watched the Vaudevillains and Blue Pants and all that stuff. And Alexa Bliss as a manager with Blake and Murphy, and some stuff would hit and some stuff wouldn't. I remember Carmella getting introduced with Enzo and Cass because she worked at the salon and they got the hair stuff from her, and it took it off the hair of, they had that, was that Marcus, what's his name? I can't remember his name right now. The French tag team and all that, there were fun things. There still had that sports entertainment part to it. But then it started to grow and grow and grow. And then all of a sudden, it gets announced and I'm there for, God, I'm as we sit here on September 25th, the date of this episode, 5 years ago at this point, I'm with the company for 3 weeks. I think I started on September 2nd of 2019. And of course, in 2019, AEW is born. Now, AEW doesn't take to the air until October 2nd. And we'll get to that date in a second. But, there had been pay-per-views at that point in time. And they were getting ready for their first show. Labor Day, September 2019. I remember doing a show with Bully Ray was after Hangman and Jericho, which I guess would have been All Out, I think. Yeah, I think it would have been All Out. Hangman and Jericho. And I remember, I think maybe I wasn't the second, it was the weekend, whatever it was. I remember doing a show the day after that. And there was some criticism of that show, but I also knew I was going to WWE. And I remember being intrigued. I remember because I was a huge wrestling fan. I used to have a New Japan podcast. And I talked about all this stuff. I had heard about the initial rumblings of AEW. I remember the story coming out that it was Jericho and JR starting the company. And I had heard through the grapevine that I knew that wasn't the case. I knew they were going to be a part of it, but I knew it wasn't about them starting a company. I had heard through people I knew at Ring of Honor and New Japan that this was more of a Young Bucks thing with Cody. And I don't think I had heard Tony Khan's name mentioned initially, but I remember going on that podcast, which nobody listened to, and be like, hey, this isn't the story. And I didn't have the platform I do now or did in the subsequent years in WWE, so nobody cared. And I wasn't in that world. I was doing Busted Open from time to time, but I wasn't a prominent name in wrestling journalism. And I wasn't holding that role. I wasn't one to break news. I was still doing, stuff with House of Hardcore. And I was in the business. I wasn't breaking news, but I would, New Japan was hot. And I was talking about what was going on there. And obviously the Bucks were there and Cody was there and Hangman was there and, Ibushi and Kenny Omega and all. I was following that very closely. It was a very hot product. But, coming off of All In, there was a feeling of something's going on here. And obviously AEW gets announced, months after All In. And here we go. And I'm starting up with WWE at the same time. So AEW is going to make their television debut with Dynamite on October 2nd, 2019. WWE ends up getting the jump by a couple of weeks because NXT ends up debuting on Wednesday nights on September 18th, 2019. If you remember at the time, they did like the first hour on USA, then they moved it over to the network because of, I think like Suits was on, which was a big deal then, and I think it's a bigger deal now. And then they got the jump. But then that first Wednesday night, my day was the debut of the Bump. The Bump debuted on that day, that morning. And we had Seth Rollins on the show as the Universal Champion. He was heading into that match with Bray, the Fiend, Hell in a Cell. Oh, my God. And we had Adam Cole on that show. And Adam Cole was the NXT champion. He was defending against Matt Riddle that night. And it was a big deal to have Seth Rollins and Adam Cole interact. Seth being a babyface, Cole is a heel. But, we played into that, hey, this is kind of cool. Like, it's a little indie. It's a little, not inside, but we both know where these guys came from. We both know they came from Ring of Honor. There's some cool juice here. And there wasn't those interactions happening at the time. NXT was very much over here and Raw's over here. And SmackDown's over here, more like that maybe than anything. But there was a lot of buzz and excitement and, still remember the fruit basket to Triple H from Reddit and all that. Like that was the buzz. But now NXT is going from taping a bunch at a time to they're going live. They're going 2 hours. Because remember, NXT was a 1 hour show. It was a very neat and tidy 1 hour show. And it meant that not everybody was on every week. And they would promote, hey, no Gargano this week, but he'll be back next week. And you didn't get oversaturated by anybody. It left you wanting more. And it was good to not oversaturate. But then all of a sudden you go 2 hours. And not only are you going 2 hours, but you're going 2 hours on USA Network. And you're going to go 2 hours head-to-head with AEW, which had a lot of buzz. Which was the closest thing to NXT. AEW was not going to be Raw and SmackDown. And it wasn't. It was closer to NXT. It had a similar feel to it. It had similar wrestling and wrestlers to it. Raw and SmackDown at that time were not, while they obviously, would end up being filled with NXT stars over time, it still wasn't overrun with them. Kevin Owens wasn't the norm. Sami Zayn wasn't the norm. They've become a big part of the show now, but it was still in more of the Vince mindset of things. So AEW ends up on the same night. So that day, we do the bump and Tess on, and we have Adam Cole on, a great fun episode. Okay, we get on a bus, a Sprinter van, to the airport because we're going to do a live watch-along of NXT on USA Network on YouTube, much like we were doing the watch-alongs to the pay-per-view. So the bump crew gets on this. Okay, here we go. We're going from, I think we flew out of LaGuardia to Orlando, and they're going to take us right to Full Sail. We're going to have a whole area set up. Okay, cool. And I had never been there before. I had just started doing the NXT Injury Report. And okay, here we go. And I know AEW's on at the same time. I have no way of watching it. Like, I couldn't be like, like, I'm on camera sitting on this couch, and I'm there with Mason Mansour, MXM now. They're on. Omos is on. Norman Smiley's on. Rachel Ellering's on. Deonna Purrazzo's on. Bianca's on. Tez is on. Oh, no, Tez was wrestling. Bianca was watching Tez wrestle. Stokely's on with me. God, there was Carino was on. I think Scotty Hottie was like just Chris Hero and I are on, and we're going back and forth about so many different random wrestling things. Rick Boogs was on before he's even like Rick Boogs. Like, and it's just a wild cavalcade of weird. I think Chelsea might have been on, if I remember correctly. Just a wild cavalcade of all this stuff going on. And the main event is Adam Cole against Matt Riddle for the NXT Championship. And I think Cole had a bad wrist, so he knocks out Riddle and wins and whatever it was. And I remember after that, Damian Priest was there. I remember that too. I remember after that, there was like a little party. Nothing crazy, but a little like, hey, first night on USA Network party. And I remember Hunter spoke to everybody who was there. And I remember seeing like, Mia Yim. I remember Wendy Chu was injured at the time, and I was talking to her, and and Borash and Ryan Katz, all these different people. It was basically everybody who was handling things at NXT, and it was a very positive night. And I remember being like, hey, this is pretty cool that I'm actually here and part of this. And I had an NXT Injury Report, as soon as the show was over, from Full Sail. It's the one of the only 2 times I stepped foot in there. And that was cool to be part of it. And here we go. Now the Wednesday Night Wars begin. And AEW won the first 7 weeks. I actually had to go back and look at this. They won the first 7 weeks. And what was the point of NXT? Well, you put it on Wednesday nights. You knew what you were doing. You want to take away some of their audience. You want to draw eyes to your cool brand. You're getting paid by USA Network to do so. And you get beat. Now, I remember those conversations was, well, this is AEW's 18. NXT is not the level of Raw and SmackDown. Sure, but there were certainly a lot of big stars there. And as you look ahead, COVID would change the tapings and the venue. Full Sail, then the PC, then Daly's Place. And then NXT, famously, on April 13th, 2021, moves to Tuesdays. And I will tell you a quick story. I was supposed to be part of or be at that show that happened after WrestleMania. And I was supposed to do a 10-day trip, and this was the Mania that didn't happen in Tampa and happens the next year. I was supposed to do a 10-day trip of going to the PC, and then they changed it. I don't know if you want to call it admitting loss, but it admitted loss. And they moved to Tuesdays. And AEW won most of the weeks ratings-wise. And I think everybody has said, and I'll say it too, that they did COVID wrestling better. at Daly's Place, and they had that. And then 5 months later, it becomes 2.0. And Hunter had his heart issue, and, Nick Khan had said it was going to be Hunter's to oversee, and he's out of the mix, and then it becomes Sean, and Sean just kind of follows along. And they sent, Kevin Dunn was involved, and people who weren't getting their hands dirty with NXT all of a sudden were. And 2.0 became this whole, and I didn't know what they were doing. Because I went, wait a minute. And I remember looking up Tony D'Angelo's 8th match was a War Games match. And 2.0 was a weird time because you could see people weren't ready, but there was also this mandate of you're not sticking around here anymore. You don't just get to stay in NXT. If it ain't working, you're gone. And people moved on because of that. And then the company changes again. And a year later, 2.0 goes to 3.0. And Sean fully takes over, but Hunter's also running the whole thing. And now they're working in conjunction. And that's where it's gotten to. And I looked because now I look at that show and say, look at the end of last night's episode. Roxanne, Julia, and Stephanie Vecker. It's kind of back, at least in terms of what was being presented at the end of that show. And it's not the whole show. There's definitely a mix of what 2.0 was supposed to be and what the old NXT was when it went to USA Network. It's all kind of mixed now. And I don't think that's a bad thing because you need to develop, but you also need people that have the experience of a Roxanne on the indies, that have the experience of a Julia, that have the experience of a Stephanie Vecker, that, also are developmental people like a Trick Williams. But you also have an Ethan Page. You have a Joe Hendry. It's a mix of everything. And that's going to be what's going to bring the best out of a WWE developmental system. So I think the initial goals of maybe trying to counteract AEW, I don't think they worked. I don't think that goal was accomplished. I do think that a goal of this needs to be something that is going to get everybody ready for the future, and we're going to be on the same page. Not NXT is going to be different than Raw and SmackDown. When those superstars get to Raw and SmackDown, they're not going to be used in the same way. They're going to be repackaged. It's not really what Vince wants. I think in the last year and a half, especially the last 2 years, Sean knows what Hunter wants, and Hunter knows what Sean's doing down there, and there's communication with that. Tommaso Ciampa talked about that recently. So I think the goals have changed, and now it's something they can make money off of. And they're going to put it in arenas the next 2 shows. What happens after that, we will see. Can they find what they need to find to deliver what CW wants? Can they do that? Can it be developmental, but also mix in some people with experience and find that? We're going to see, and I'm very interested to see how much CW puts into this and what they expect from it and what we hear out of that. Because now you have shows on 3 different networks or 3 different places, or you will come January. Raw is going to be on Netflix, still on USA. NXT's on CW, and obviously SmackDown is staying on USA. They've always wanted to have their hands on a lot of things, but how will all of that cross over? And how does a new TV partner? There was excitement with Fox 5 years ago. What's the excitement level with CW right now? What's that honeymoon period look like? Very interesting to be following this. Much like people are following the Vince conversation and a statement about buying back the documentary and the Netflix stuff. From what I've seen so far, watching all of it, yeah. Vince doesn't like the fact that he talked about, I'm saying one thing, but I'm thinking another, and like I said, those interviews were conducted years ago. You go back to 2021, and they keep putting that up in the Netflix doc. And we're going to get into this in greater detail tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern. So for those at the Matt member level, at Matt Camper level, at the Matt event level, you can join us at 7 p.m. Eastern tomorrow for a full breakdown of the Netflix documentary. I'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern with an interesting perspective from AEW Grand Slam. A lot to get into in the world of professional wrestling. Leave your comments down below on what you want to hear from, your thoughts on where NXT's at and where they're going. Make sure you check it out on anywhere you get your podcasts. Rate, review, subscribe. Become a subscriber for free on podcast or at thewrestlingmatchshow.com. And think about becoming a member. You could be part of that Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary conversation tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern. So, with that being said, I know it's a quick one. There's a lot going on this week, and I got to get to it. I'll be back tomorrow, both at 1 p.m. Eastern for everybody and 7 p.m. Eastern for Matt members to talk about wrestling even more right here on The Wrestling